Altcoin season. When will the explosive growth phase of altcoin season truly begin? Like we saw in the last two bull markets where certain altcoins were going up 50, 60, or even 100% in a single day. In this video, I'm going to show you the relationship between gold and the altcoins and why that massive dump is coming very soon is going to pump altcoins like you have never seen before.
암호화폐 전문가 피터 앤서니가 알트코인 시즌을 면밀히 분석한 내용을 전달합니다. 그는 단순한 가격 변동이 아닌 시장을 움직이는 근본적인 힘에 주목하는데요. 그가 지목한 결정적인 신호는 무엇일까요? 영상 끝까지 함께 확인해 보시죠.
So when will the altcoins go bananas and why haven't they been moving that aggressively along with the M2? Well, because of one thing. M2 basically drives Bitcoin, right? It is the liquidity in the system. It's why we see money flooding into crypto all the time. USDT market cap just keeps going up and up by billions of dollars every single week. This money is finding its way into Bitcoin and into some of the altcoins, but not in any particularly aggressive fashion. Yes, we've seen the Bitcoin dominance falling, so in my opinion, altcoin season has already begun, but we're yet to discover that major growth phase. But that major growth phase is caused by something that happened in the global economy. And by understanding this, we're going to know exactly when that major explosion is going to happen. And it's going to happen because it's linked to basically whether or not banks, institutions, etc. are risk on or risk off. Let me just explain that for a moment. When they're risk off, they want to be involved in low-risk assets because the market economy is a little bit uncertain. Things are not necessarily going their way. They want to then be holding things like gold. They then want to hold things like bonds, treasuries, and other low-risk assets where they can pretty much guarantee themselves an income. On the flip side of things, when they're risk on, they're going to be into stocks, they're going to be into Bitcoin, and they're going to be into crypto. And the altcoins are pretty much the other end of this scale. So we've got bonds and treasuries at one end, you've got altcoins at the other far end. And that's why when we see crypto markets picking up, you start to see Bitcoin running, then Ethereum, then some of the larger caps, then the small caps, then you start to see meme coins and NFTs and all the other kind of crazier stuff going up very aggressively as that kind of money washes down through the system. So if we can identify the low risk assets out there that the institutions are in, and if we can identify that those low risk assets are about to fall or have already been falling, then we should have a good indicator that the money is about to move and wash down through that channel, aggressively hitting into the altcoins and things like that. Because as soon as that expansion phase begins, everything goes crazy. And the first thing I want to show you is this. It's the reverse repo market. Now, what you can see back on January the 4th, 2023, you can see that this was worth $2.55 trillion. Now, the overnight repo market belongs to the Fed. It's like the Federal Reserve Bank. And if banks and institutions want to put money into a low risk area to be able to get like 4% back or so, they can put money into this overnight repo market. Okay, so it's a really low risk place so that they can go put a lot of money, earn a little bit of a percentage and not have to worry too much. Now, you'll notice that this started on the 3rd of January, 2023, and then it started to fall aggressively. And that's pretty interesting, right? Because you can see that the Bitcoin price around the 3rd of January, 2023 was worth around $16,700. And from there, it aggressively started to move up and has been pretty much in an aggressive bull market ever since, despite having various different pullbacks, if we can call them that, along the way. Now, this overnight repo market, which is the safe end of the scale that I was talking about, was up here at the bottom of the bear market and is now coming down to being around zero. As soon as this starts to get to zero, bearing in mind it's at 33 billion right now and has fallen over 97%, that pretty much indicates that everyone is now looking to go risk on. Okay, they're looking to go into riskier assets. And that's because the US right now is about to cut interest rates. When interest rates come down, they can't just put money in here and earn interest rates because they're going to be losing money on the money that they've borrowed from someone else. Okay, so if I borrow money at, let's say, 3% and I'm making 4%, I'm happy, I make 1%. But if I can now only make 3% or 2% because the interest rates get cut a lot, I'm now at a loss because I'm paying 3% to someone else. I have to then go down the risk curve and go into riskier assets. And this is basically what we're already starting to see.
피터 앤서니는 M2 증가가 암호화폐 시장으로 자금을 흘려보내는 것은 사실이지만 그동안 알트코인이 상대적으로 덜 움직였던 이유는 기관들이 여전히 안전자산에 자금을 두고 있었기 때문이라고 설명합니다. 그는 그 대표적인 신호로 역레포 시장을 언급하는데요. 이곳은 은행과 기관들이 단기적으로 자금을 맡기고 안정적인 이자를 얻을 수 있는 초저위험 영역으로 불확실한 시기에 막대한 자금을 잠시 대피시켜두는 일종의 피난처 같은 역할을 해왔습니다. 그런데 2023년 1월 2.5조에 달했던 영래포 규모가 최근 들어 97% 이상 줄어 사실상 0에 가까워졌습니다. 피터 앤서니는 이를 매우 중요한 전환점으로 보는데요. 더 이상 저수익 안전자산에 머물 이유가 없어진 기관들이 금리 인하 국면에서 자연스럽게 위험자산으로 이동할 수밖에 없다는 겁니다. 그렇게 이동한 자금은 비트코인을 시작으로 이더리움, 대형 알트코인, 중소형 알트코인, 나아가 밈코인과 NFT까지 확산되며 강력한 상승 사이클을 만들어냅니다. 결국 알트코인 시즌의 본격적인 폭발은 글로벌 자금이 안전자산을 떠나 리스크온 자산으로 몰리는 순간 촉발될 것이라는 것이 그의 주장입니다. 그리고 혹시 거래 수수료 절반을 다시 환급받는 방법 아직 모르시나요? 단 5분만 투자하면 평생 수수료 돌려받는 셀퍼럴, 선택이 아닌 필수입니다. 자세한 내용은 영상 더보기란을 확인해보세요.
Now, to confirm this further, gold that has been the store of value, the hedge against inflation, basically the asset that everyone holds when they're worried about where the economy is going, is in a very precarious position. In fact, gold has been going up aggressively for a very long time. Okay, Bitcoin has been like a store of value as well, like gold. And that's why Bitcoin perhaps has been going up as well. But altcoins are slightly different. They're like the opposite end of the scale. They're the riskiest assets of all against gold. And what we're seeing right now is that gold is in this classic Wyckoff distribution pattern. And in my opinion, this is like the LPSY. Okay, this is the last point of supply is what I believe it means. Okay, and ultimately, this means that this pattern is on the verge of breaking down. Okay, nothing can go vertical forever. Eventually, it has to cool off. Now, the Wyckoff distribution pattern is a pattern that was identified by Richard Wyckoff back in like the 1920s on Wall Street. Okay, he was a trader. He identified that the big banks, institutions were playing games to identify where these patterns would come in. And typically, they come in at the top of patterns to try and get more and more buyers to come into the space. And you also get Wyckoff accumulations, like we saw in the Bitcoin price, all the way down at the bottom of the bear market. And this allowed a number of people to get in to these absolute lows over here. Okay, so these distribution patterns have been around for hundreds of years and they're still being used today. So what does it mean for us? Well, it means that gold right now is on the verge of breaking out of this pattern and going lower. And I want to point out what happened last time gold had a major correction like this. As you can see, this was basically the end of October 2024. And I want to show you the others chart, which is the altcoins outside of the top 10 and what they did around this same date. You can see that this is basically the end of October here into the 4th, 5th of November. They go up extremely aggressively. This is basically an indicator at that time that the market was going risk on. Okay, we saw a lot of people suddenly speculating on what Donald Trump was going to do for crypto, what he was going to do for the global economy. It was looking more and more likely like he was going to get in. Eventually, he did get confirmed, okay, as the next US president. Everyone was super bullish and excited about this. He then pumped the price of altcoins to the upside as everyone went risk on. This is why this gold chart that did this led to that mini altcoin season that we saw back in November, December. Now, many people will be like, well, we didn't even see an altcoin season around then. This went up 136%. If we go back and look at some individual altcoins around that time, like Sui, you can see had a very, very strong run there. We have Beam having a very strong rally, Brett, a meme coin, having a very strong rally, and a lot of other altcoins as well had very strong rallies into that time. Now, this time is slightly different because this right now is happening ahead of time. This is preempting the interest rate cuts that are bound to happen in September. I say bound to happen because all other things are stacking up in the favor of an interest rate cut coming in and around the 17th or 18th of September, whenever that FOMC meeting is. Now, when this eventually falls, it's going to be accelerated by an interest rate cut. Now, I know what you've been told, and I know people have been talking about this, that into September, we're going to see a strong correction. Now, that correction has been linked to many things. I personally agree with this because I do see this big pullback on the M2. And this does tell me that there could well be a bit of a pause in here for Bitcoin. Now, something to be aware of is this. When the Bitcoin price has been going up aggressively, it can sort of decouple in a way from the overall M2, and it can peak just a few days or so before, like it did here, okay, where it sort of peaked around this point and then the M2 went up and then Bitcoin kind of goes sideways. I do think that there is a chance that we might see this earlier or slightly later. And I know you're like, well, that doesn't help me at all because do I need to sell on the kind of 10th of September or do I need to sell on like the 20th of September? I agree with you, it is confusing, but one thing that is worth paying attention to that might give you a little bit of a clue as to when to take some profits, not to necessarily sell everything, because I don't intend to do that, I intend to take some profits, is to use CoinGlass and go to the funding rate heat map, which is this one here, okay? And then you just need to slide this across, go for like a year or so, and you can see something interesting here. Now, every single time this starts to go yellow, or in fact orange, it shows that the funding rates are high. You see funding rates 50%. And when they're really high, it shows that everyone's going long, and that's usually an indicator that we are ready for a correction. You can see that we had this basically coming in July. We then saw a little bit coming up again just the other day, around the 13th, 14th of August. Some charts going a little bit more orange. This is usually a good indicator that we are due to have a cool off in the short term. If you look over the last 2 weeks, 14th of August, you can see this suddenly goes orange here. If you go over the last year, you can see back in December, November, everything went orange. All of a sudden, market pulls back, corrects, everyone gets washed out. Basically happens time and time again. So what I've personally been paying attention to is what's going on with the FOMC meeting, because I do believe that that could be a sell the news event, which would happen around the 17th or 18th of September, which, as you can see, this basically peaks here on the 22nd. So that would kind of align with what we're basically saying. 17th, 18th comes in somewhere around here when the M2 is sort of just before. And that means that potentially we could see a peak slightly before, like we've seen over the past few times.
피터 앤서니는 알트코인 시장의 방향성을 보여주는 중요한 단서로 최근 금의 흐름을 언급합니다. 금은 전통적으로 가치 저장 수단이자 인플레이션 해지 자산으로 경제가 불확실할 때 모든 투자자들이 찾는 안전한 피난처였습니다. 하지만 지금 금은 와이코프 분배 패턴에 따라 불안정한 위치에 놓여 있으며 그는 이를 마지막 공급 지점이라 규정합니다. 즉, 더 이상 수직 상승을 이어갈 수 없고 조정이 임박했다는 것이죠. 실제로 과거에도 금이 큰 폭의 조정을 보였을 때 상위 10개를 제외한 알트코인이 단기간에 100% 이상 급등하며 소위 미니 알트코인 시즌이 열렸습니다. 이는 시장이 리스크온으로 전환되는 강력한 신호였다는 건데요. 피터 앤서니는 이번에도 같은 흐름이 반복될 가능성이 크다고 설명합니다. 특히 9월 FOMC 회의에서 예상되는 금리 인하가 금 하락세를 가속화할 것이고, 이는 곧 자금이 비트코인을 거쳐 알트코인 전반으로 확산되는 계기가 될 수 있다는 겁니다. 그는 투자자들이 단기 조정 가능성을 인지하면서도 펀딩비와 같은 지표를 활용해 차익 실현 시점을 잘 포착하는 것이 중요하다고 강조합니다.
Now, as many people are saying, is like, will the bull market be over at this point? I personally don't think so, because as soon as the interest rates cut and we see QE from the Fed, which is basically like money printing and everything else, you will start to see the dollar being devalued. If the dollar starts to devalue, guess what? All the other countries around the world, like China and countries in the EU and the UK and everyone else who have been wanting to print money because their economies are also struggling after COVID and after all these other things going on with tariffs and whatever else, they will also want to print money. They can print money far more aggressively if the dollar weakens enough, because that trade kind of like agreement between the US and whichever country is made easier. The global economy ultimately will increase its liquidity. They will pump money into the system. You can see this by the fact that when the DXY goes down, the M2 money supply goes up. When the DXY goes up, the M2 money supply goes down. Rate cuts equal weak dollar equal M2 increase, and we'll see this pump further towards the upside very, very aggressively. That will give us our kind of blow off top bull market. But remember, smart money, banks, etc. are preempting those moves.
오늘 영상 도움이 되셨다면 구독, 좋아요 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.